So I'm doing the EGR valve, which is exhaust gas recirculation valve, on my Astra H. It's a 1.3 diesel engine, and I've had a fault code for a couple of years, and I've got the proper Opcom reader, or a Chinese clone, and it tells me it's an EGR problem. So I'm changing the EGR valve, which are notorious for getting sooted up and not functioning. So I've taken the old one off, which was this one, and before I put the new one on, I just thought I'd quickly show you the parts to this. So basically you've got this valve, this is the valve here. This side here would have the exhaust on it. It comes to here via a water cooler, and in normal operation this solenoid would be pushed in against that. When this is energized, this solenoid springs out to the length it is now and operates this valve. When that valve operates, it opens the valve, and that lets the exhaust to come in to this section here, which goes to the inlet valve. Now it's quite awkward to get off. There are two big bolts here that go through there. They're not too hard, but the worst ones are the three that hold this onto the water cooler. So I'm just going to put it back in and show you where all these fixings and fasteners are. However, the worst one by far was the fastener that was in here, which was identical to this one, so torque, and all that does is hold a hose clamp in place. So on that one I'm actually going to change it for a hex head, because it was such a nightmare to get out. So I've switched over to the action cam, and I'm having to narrate it because the microphone's fairly rubbish. So I'm first going to zoom in to where the EGR valve is fitted to, and you can see down there, just get the torch, and there we go, shine the torch on to where it is. You can see those holes, that's where the exhaust comes out, and you've got the three main screws that fit that to the EGR, and you've got that horrible one at the bottom where the hose is connected. And then we're going to go to the back of the engine and we'll see where it's fitted to the head. So you can see on the right you've got the exhaust, and then you've got the two that go into the side of the head. So now I've fitted the two main bolts in. They're not tightened up yet. Those aren't too hard to get to, but the awkward ones are the three that fit the exhaust side on. So just swap around and go to the other side. And I've had to freeze the picture here, and you can see the top two there and the other one's to the left, but by far the worst one is this one that's at the bottom underneath all of it, holding the hose in. So in here, this is a typical view you're going to get when you are trying to do these screws. You can basically get the tool in and see through the top, shining a torch down. So that one's quite easy to get to, that's the top one, and then you've got one more to the right and one more to the left, which is slightly more awkward because it's underneath a hose. Let's see that hose there. The other one to the right, you can just see there, is okay to get to. So I'm just going to finish off this video by explaining what I did at the start. I know this is a bit out of sequence, but that's how I did it. So the first thing I had to do to get to the EGR, which is underneath here, is to remove the battery. That obviously gives you loads more space, but it's also a safety aspect, because when you do the bolts at the back of the engine, if I can get there, I don't know, when you do the bolts back there, you'll probably, like me, end up dropping one or two of the bolts, and they fall straight onto the starter motor, and the starter motor obviously has a live feed to it. So it's always best to disconnect the battery when you're working near the starter motor. You also could short it using the ratchet that I had to use. So just to quickly go over it again, I really can't see it with this camera, so I'm just going to narrate it. So you've got the two main screws that go to the back, they're relatively easy to do, and then you've got the three main screws that hold it onto the exhaust side, but it's that one screw that holds that hose underneath. But in my case, what I ended up doing was getting an Allen head bolt, as you can see here. That way I could use a ball joint on a Allen key, and you can see at the end I have wasted threaded section, which allowed me to feed this into the hole, because you're having to do everything by touch. You can't even see this item. I've wasted far too long putting this Allen head bolt in, and at the end of the day, leaning over the engine, I ended up bruising my ribs on various things. And one last thing, make sure when you're messing around near all these pipes that you don't end up breaking something. I ended up breaking this non-return valve, so I had to order another one of those, and if I hadn't have spotted that, that was the pump down here, air pump or vacuum pump, which then feeds the brake booster. So it would have been quite bad if I hadn't have spotted that. That would have been the power brakes with no power.